Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about another Apple product. This time it's going to be an Apple Power Mac. To give you some context, Apple have pretty much always made all-in-one computers, starting with the original Macintosh, and then the 512, the Plus, etc, etc. I've got a SE up here, which you can just see in the background. That all went through then through to the iMac G3, which I've got up here, and then ending in the G4 based eMac. They then changed the form factor, went onto the G5 iMac, and that product line still survives today. But in the middle section, the form factor changed a little bit. So between the compact Macs here and the end of the kind of front speaker facing compact Macs, if you want to call them that, the beginning of that range started with a product we're just going to have a look at now, and that is the Apple Performa 5200CD. So here's the one I picked up recently. So this is an all-in-one. It's got front firing speakers, and so basically it's the same kind of form factor as that G3 iMac that was in the background, and you know, it is even the same form factor as the eMac, but basically this is the first PowerPC that came in this form factor. There were a couple of earlier Motorola 68000 base ones that had a similar sort of form factor, slightly clunkier at the bottom, but this was kind of the first of the PowerPC ones. These have a terrible reputation for falling apart, both on the external and on the internal. I bought this one. It's sold as working, although I think there is a small problem with it, which we'll have a look at in a bit. But this is what I got for my money. I got a complete one. The case is actually in really good condition, considering how old it is and considering how fragile these plastics are. There's not any broken plastics on this that I can see on the outside, which is, I think, quite remarkable from what I can understand. It's a bit yellow, but not bad, actually. Not bad again for the age. So this came out in 1995. So it's 30 years old, give or take. It's 29 years old at this point. So it's actually survived pretty well, if indeed it has survived. I've got some extra bits and pieces with it, not just the system unit. I've got a ADB mouse. This is the desktop bus mouse 2 in this particular case. I've got an envelope of documentation and software, and it does come with the original reinstall disk, which is 7.5.1, so that's cool. So we can reinstall this back to stock if we need to, and there's a couple of user guides in there. It also comes with a very chunky Apple keyboard. In this case it's the Enhanced Keyboard 2. This is the one with the adjustable height on the back and ADB ports on the side rather than tucked in the middle. So that's nice. It's got a bit of a pale section here where there was this removable function cover template thing. This one hasn't been written on, but I think they were designed to be written on, so you could customize it for whatever you want, whatever app. So that's nice to have. It's quite a chunky switched keyboard. It's quite a nice one. And it also came with this, which if you're less than 50 years old, you've got no idea what this is. So when CRTs, you know, first came around, they weren't the most ergonomic things, and there was a big worry that they emitted a load of radiation. And so for a long time you could buy these accessories which were sort of radiation protector / anti-glare screens. So basically this is a tinted glass filter with an anti-reflection coating on it, which is why it's got this kind of purple hue, and it's got this wire on the bottom that you clip to an earth so that it doesn't build up any static. It protects you from this terrible, terrible thing that's in front of you that's going to kill you. So these went out of fashion fairly quickly, but they were fairly common for people who use their computers a lot. And if you are a bit light sensitive and you're upset by the flicker of the screen, sometimes these things can actually help with that. But protecting you from harmful radiation, I think, was a little bit of an oversell maybe. Anyway, that's what that is. We're not going to be using that. So we are going to be using this. It comes with its stand. The CD drive is a slightly different colour, so I'm wondering whether that's been updated at some point in the past. It's still got its label, which looks in pretty good condition. There's a few grubby fingerprints on it, but overall it's actually in pretty good condition. Let's have a quick look at the back. Around the back, it looks like the back of an average monitor, except for this section here. So we've got a power switch with a separate dedicated on-off. We've got 3 ports here, 2 serial ports and an ADB port. External SCSI and audio in and out. And you can see there's lots of blanking places for other things, because you could actually have this with proper AV equipment, and I think even a tuner added so you could use it a bit like a television. You've got 3 slightly different coloured panels here, so I'm wondering whether some point in the past this has had those optional extras put in but taken out again and replaced by these covers. But it's actually in pretty good condition. When I was moving it around, I did gently press the side and you could hear it creak. The side plastics just around here seem incredibly fragile. The back's okay and underneath the front's okay, but I wouldn't want to pick this up with my palms on the side, which is what I nearly did. You can see there's 2 screw heads here, and that's because this whole rear compartment removes and exposes the motherboard. This particular model was made in July of 1995, so it is an early one. I'm not going to take it apart straight away. I'm going to do the stupid thing. I'm going to plug it in and turn it on, mainly because I know that it's working. At least the previous seller told me it was working. So the argument for an all-in-one is actually quite compelling because it is a very tidy setup. You've got 1 box, you've got 1 power cable, and you've got 1 cable. At least if you're using ADB, you've only got 1 cable going to the back because your mouse plugs straight into the keyboard. So it is a very compact and tidy setup. I think for lots of reasons that's good, particularly good in education, which is where a lot of them were sold, particularly in North America. In Europe, I think they were mostly sold to consumers, but you know, it's just a nice, neat, tidy way of organising your desk. So it's plugged in. Let's see if we can power it on. So the main power switch is on. These also presumably have soft power, so I'm going to press the power button on top of the computer, on top of the keyboard. And wow, that was a good chime. I haven't got any other computers with that chime. Hard drive is spinning up, I can hear that. Screen hasn't got, oh, here it comes. Welcome to Macintosh. Okay, let me see if I can get rid of that flicker. Okay, there we go. So I've got a very low shutter speed on, so hopefully there's a minimal flicker on the screen. It is starting up. Looks pretty good, pretty sharp. It's a little bit dim. And the thing that I was told about it is that it's a bit blue, got an overall bit of a blue cast, which I think it definitely has. I was worried the red gun wasn't actually working, but there was red in those little startup applets that came up here. So I think the monitor is okay. It probably just needs some adjustment. Okay. So it thinks the time is wrong, so that tells me the PRAM battery is probably not functional. Okay, so there's a load of stuff on here. Okay, well that's interesting. Given that the install media was in the packaging, I assumed that this would be a clean install, but it looks like there is a load of apps in here, which is interesting. So you've also got the quick launcher configured. Let's just see if some other bits and pieces work. Let's see if the optical drive opens and closes. Yes. Okay. Just took a very hard press. That works, and it didn't sound terrible. Let's put a floppy in. Floppy's been recognised. Yeah, floppy seems to be working as well. That's great. Let's see if the eject works. Yes. Fine. So it looks like the optical drive works. Down here we've got some controls for the screen and the volume, and there's a window here for an infrared remote control. And if you have the AV option, I think you can kind of essentially use it a bit like a television using a separate remote, which I do not have. There's a front mounted headphone socket here, and obviously the power light. Let's see what the brightness adjustment does. So it does get a bit brighter. It gets less blue, weirdly, as it gets brighter. Do the volume buttons work? Don't know. There's no feedback on the screen. I assumed there would be a volume slider given the AV aspect of this machine. But yeah, overall it seems to be in pretty good condition, and most of the major components work. So the screen itself is a 14-inch with a viewable just under 13. Maximum resolution is 834, I think, by 600 something, which it looks like this is currently set to 2. And it's pretty sharp actually. It's fairly flat as well. It's not a Trinitron tube, but it is fairly flat top to bottom, slightly less flat left to right, but it's not a bad screen actually. I'm very happy with that. Even at this maximum resolution, things are pretty readable. We have system software 7.5.5, but that's different from the installed disk, so this has had an update at some point. Looks like it's got 24 megabytes of RAM. It's using virtual memory by the looks of it, but 24 megs of RAM is a healthy amount for system 7.5. So there's quite a lot on here. Let's have a quick look at the control panel. Microsoft Personal Web Servers on here. interesting. It's doubly interesting because there's no network card in this machine, so doubly interesting. You've got all the usual stuff. Let's have a look at the monitors. So we're currently in 256 color mode. Screen changed color just then, I don't know if you noticed. Okay, so yeah, we're running 832 by 624. That's the resolution I was trying to think of. That's 75 Hertz. And at that resolution, there's only 1 megabyte of video RAM. So at that resolution, there's not enough for more than 256 colors. So the other options are, yeah, there's a definite bit of a flicker in the screen there. So 640 by 480 at 60 Hertz. Probably don't want to do that. We probably want 800 by 600 at 72 Hertz. It's going to make it more readable, but we've still only got 256K of colors. 256 colors, I should say. If we drop it down to 640 480, then we get our 1000 color choices. The flicker rate has gone up a lot. I can tell out the corner of my eye that that's flickering even without having to look at the screen. So let's go back up to a higher refresh rate. So that is rock solid to look at. It's got a bit of a flicker on the screen, on the camera, but visually, in real world, that's pretty good. So you can control the screen brightness in this menu, and you can adjust the contrast. So there is a brightness button on the front, but no contrast. But you can do that from within software and control panel. At this point in time is when Apple transitioned from having SCSI hard disks to ID hard disks as a cost-saving measure. So this has actually got a hard disk which is on the IDE bus, not on a SCSI bus. The optical drive is still SCSI, and the external port is obviously still SCSI. So let's have a quick look at the drive, see what information we can find about that. So yeah, so you can see it's a parallel ATA drive, and it was last modified in 1956. I think that's probably wrong, but it was created in 1998, so that's probably when it was reinstalled. There's 300 megabytes being used on disk. We don't know how big the disk is. There's nothing interesting in recent documents, so it's probably been a bit sanitized. The screen's definitely occasionally just changing color, so there's probably a few capacitors on the way out, so it'll probably need recapping at some point. So it's actually fairly nippy. These early PowerPCs didn't come with a onboard level 2 cache. This is pretty nippy, so I'm wondering whether actually this has actually got the cache card installed. So it looks like 2002 was the last time Internet Explorer was used. So the screen geometry is really good. It's very square. It does have this slight change and flicker when it sometimes goes a little bit more blue. So there's quite a lot on this hard drive. Let's go by date. So it looks like 2003 was the last modified file, and then a few in 2002 again. So again, this hasn't been used for quite a long time, at least not actively. So there we have it. So there's a few bits of interesting software on there, minimal personal documentation, which is good. We know the floppy drive works. Let's try the optical drive with an actual disk. So we've got iPlay for Macintosh, a collection of games. Let's see if it can read one of the disks. It's certainly mounted it on the desktop. Let's see if it can actually work. So in theory, this game, or this machine meets the minimum requirements for this game, so it'll be interesting to see whether it will actually run in a playable configuration. This collection of games was released in 1996, which is a year after this machine was made, but hopefully it'll be playable. Okay, here we are in the Descent menu. We're getting the audio, and I think in this game some of the audio comes from the CD, so it's playing through the speakers, and they're okay. There's hardly any bass, they're a bit tinny, but the volume's reasonable and there's no distortion. So as you can see, the frame rate's pretty poor. It's probably... Oh, I can't play this with a keyboard. But yeah, frame rate is pretty poor. It's probably 5 or 10 frames a second maximum. SimCity Classic, scrolling around seems reasonably good, but you get the occasional just glitch. It suddenly stutters every now and again. Well, it's behaving itself a little better now. It's not currently playing any music, which it was a short while ago. So in terms of responsiveness, it's certainly, the interface is pretty good. Switching between windows requires a little bit of a redraw, but it's not too bad. It's pretty responsive. Placing things down here is good. There's no issue with that. Okay, let's try a little bit of Flight Unlimited. So it's pretty boring, this tutorial, but you can see the updates on the screen here, maybe 1-2 frames a second. So it may be possible to improve this by changing the settings, but on the default settings, you know, it's actually not that good. So basically, for 2D games, this is fine. Anything from 1996 or before is going to be fine. Anything 3D from 1996 onwards is going to be poor. I haven't tried Marathon on here, but I'm sure that's going to be fine. But anything with a proper 3D engine is going to be a little bit tricky, like a flight simulator. Or as you saw, even Descent was struggling a little bit. What actually makes the 5200 work? Let's turn it around and have a look. So before we open up, let's have a quick look at the documentation that we've got. So we've got Macintosh Performa CD, a guide to reinstalling software from the CD. So that's going to be very useful because I think we will reset this back to 7.5.1 and then apply a few updates. That seems to be the most sensible thing to do, as that's when the computer came out. This can run later versions, and in fact, a lot of people recommend 8.5 because it fixes some of the kind of networking issues that this model has, because this model is referred to by many people as the worst Apple Macintosh ever made. And so 8.6 and 8.5 allegedly helps improve the stability a bit, but 7.51 is what it would have come with originally. So that's nice to have. Apple at ease. So there's a quick reference card for that. So basically at ease is kind of like a very basic, simplified interface, probably aimed at schools and school children. And it basically acts like a quick, massive launcher for whatever you set up on there. So that simplifies the interface. We're not going to be using that, I don't think, but documentation there for it. We've got the original setup poster. Plug it in, keyboard, mouse. Read the user's guide. And it's interesting, there's a picture here of a keyboard, because what we're going to look at next is the packing list. So when you bought a Performa 5200CD, you got the following. You got the computer, a mouse, a power cord, the install disk, some manuals, and that was it. You did not get a keyboard. This is from the time when Apple was still selling keyboards separately. So whoever bought this keyboard spent a little bit of money getting one of the better ones. So that's nice. But it's interesting that there is a keyboard shown in the quick start guide when that isn't actually provided by Apple. So look at this one. So this is the internal CD-ROM. So this is an Apple CD300i+. So it's a 2 times SCSI, oh, it's SCSI label here, SCSI CD-ROM drive. It still seems to be working really, really well, which is good. And this just shows you about some of the multimedia apps that come with macOS 7.5.1 that allow you to make the best use of that. And then also we have a technical specification booklet, which is really nice. So it's telling us this is a PowerPC 603 at 75 megahertz. So as standard, these would have come with 8 megabytes of RAM in one SIM socket. And it's got 2 SIM sockets available. And the maximum official is 64 megs of RAM. So 2 32 megabyte modules. So at the moment, we've got more than that. So I'm guessing there's a 16 and an 8. It's got the ROM. So it says it's got a cache, level 2 cache. So it may be that this already has a cache card in it, which agrees with what I was feeling earlier on. It's fairly nippy for a 75 megahertz 603. And then you've got this 1 megabyte of frame buffer memory that's fixed. You can't upgrade that. It comes with 1.4 megabyte super drive, internal IDE drive, and an internal SCSI CD-ROM drive. It's 15-inch with a 0.28 dot pitch inch. It shows you the resolutions and what you can do if you've got the optional external video port connector, which we don't have on this system. You can actually connect up a second display, but it mirrors only. You can't extend the desktop onto that second display. It's got built-in 8-bit sound. It tells you about the ADB for the keyboard, 2 serial ports. And again, one of the reasons this computer is not liked is those serial ports don't have hardware handshaking, so they're only available to go up to 9600 baud, which is pretty slow if you're trying to connect to 56k modem, for example. The external SCSI, it's got an LC compatible processor direct slot. So from the LC range, when that was first introduced, it's been carried through to this machine. And indeed, in some markets, this is actually considered an LC machine. It has the LC at the end of its name. There's a communication slot, so you can put in a modem or a network card into that. and that's separate from your PDS. And then there's a separate slot again for video and TV tuners. So it's quite expandable, considering it's an all-in-one from Apple, but each of those things was optional. Nothing very exciting here, but it does tell you that it weighs 21.5 kilos. It's pretty heavy. But it's nice to have a spec sheet with your actual computer. That doesn't happen very much. Okay, let's take it apart and see what's inside. So here we are around the back of the machine again. So to access the internals of this machine, there's basically a motherboard in the bottom half down here. And to get to that, you have to remove this plastic cover, and then you have to remove the motherboard, which is on a tray. So let's get this plastic cover off. Now, as we've already mentioned, brittle plastics, I'm expecting this to go badly wrong. There's two plastic lugs underneath that you have to clip to pull this off. And there we go. Just like on an LC, those clips are very fragile and it's broken off. Let's try and get a little bit more room underneath here. Yeah, plastic everywhere. So the second clip has sprung off, and not only that, the third tab along the top here has popped off as well. It's very frustrating, very frustrating. So we can now see this kind of motherboard tray in this section here, and then underneath is room for, in this case, a hard drive on this side. So we don't know what size hard drive that is. These originally came with 1 GB drives, although some of the educational or really budget versions came with a 500 megabyte. Let's see if we can get the motherboard out without breaking anything else. So you do that by unclipping this handle and then basically just pulling, in theory. So as it comes forward, you'll be able to see the important bits. So it attaches to the rest of the system with this edge connector here. So this is the hole that remains when you take out the motherboard. And if you look at this back panel connector, you can see there's this little push out here, and that would have been for the satellite receiver that I think that presumably would have connected somehow in this part. That looks like there's a little rail here that it would have clipped onto. I'm not going to take the hard drive out purely because I don't want to break that caddy, and judging how brittle these plastics are, I think that's probably a sensible thing. So in terms of the motherboard, this is what it looks like. It's quite compact. It's also the same motherboard in the 6200 apparently, and it's interchangeable with some of the other later models as well if you manage to organise a different power supply. So it's quite a neatly laid out board. There's an interesting mixture of electrolytic and tantalum capacitors on here. These caps don't look like they're leaking, which is very, very welcome. These are the slightly smaller, more surface mounted ones, which can leak in things like the LC and the LC3. So one thing that's beneficial about these is they don't have the standard half AA battery. They use these clock batteries, which are less likely to leak. Oh, the Velcro is very tough. I don't want to put it too quickly and yank anything off the motherboard. There we go. So this is obviously not working anymore. We're going to need to replace this. But at least it hasn't leaked all over the board. Let's just take off the connector, make sure there's no corrosion on the connector, which there isn't. So that's all good. So in terms of layout, you've got the processor here, memory here. This is going to be the ROM, and it looks like it's a combined ROM and level 2 cache. It looks like on this side we have ROM, and on this side we have cache, which is interesting. That's how it appears, rather than two separate cards. We've got the CPU here, and then the rest of the support logic is over here. These two look like RAM chips, so that's probably the video memory, which is non-upgradable. We do have some connectors on the motherboard. So this one is the video in slot. So you can get video into this machine. I think it's got an S-video connector with a couple of audio connectors, and that goes in that slot. Here we've got the PDS slot, the processor direct slot. That's the same as the LC range. And then you've got the communication slot, which is where either a modem or a network card would go and then poke out through this housing on the back. There's also a connect over here, which carries a long video card which connects on the back here, and that is for a separate video out system. So you can connect a second monitor, but I think, as I understand it, you can only mirror to that monitor. There isn't enough VRAM to do anything other than that. As suspected, both RAM slots are full, so I'm guessing they've got an 8 and a 16 in there. That would make sense because they are double-sided on this one and single-sided on this one, with otherwise the same memory chip, so I'm guessing this might be an upgrade from Apple itself. Motherboard's pretty clean, there's a little bit of dust, but nothing too significant. So I'm not going to play with this, so I'm going to get another battery at some point. I'm going to put this one back on for now, just so it doesn't complain when it boots up. But replacing this with a new one, if they're available, is going to be the way to go. If not, we can bodge something. So on the other side of the board there is a little bit of logic, and then there's these spring clips to stop it from touching the bottom. They presumably go to the ground plane, and then you can see the other side of the edge connector here. Presumably this is the data and this is the power. There's something down on this edge that looks remarkably like liquid, but actually it's a scratch. Or is it? No, I think it's the lacquer has just started to shrink very slightly. So let's put it back in. So in theory, that's just a case of pushing it back in. And then it should connect with the connector at the other end, and then just hide the handle as before. And so we're not going to take the hard drive out. Don't want to break the caddy. I'm going to try and super glue the catches back on here just to see if we can do that, but I'm not holding out a lot of hope for that. Okay, so this is the piece we need to get back on, and it needs to go here. So I'm just going to build up a little platform for it to rest against. I think that's going to give it about the right angle once it's set. I nearly said dry, but dry isn't the right word, is it? So yeah, that looks fine. So let me just super glue that in place. I'm going to use some super glue activator. It's theory it makes it a better bond. A very small amount of super glue on. Here we go. I managed to get some super glue on here, so I'm trying not to touch that. We'll leave that to set. There we go. That should do it. We'll give it a little while, and then we'll try the other two clips. So there we have it, the Macintosh Performa 5200CD, possibly one of the worst Apples ever made. But actually, is it? Well, I kind of expected to hate it, and broken plastics aside, it hasn't been that much of a frustration to use this machine. But equally, I'm not trying to network it or use a modem, which is what would have been happening in 1995 or 1996. Overall, my impression of this machine is actually it's not too bad. It's slightly quicker than I was expecting it to be. It hasn't broken on me, it hasn't got an exploding battery inside, it has got exploding plastics. But ultimately, you know, this form factor works really well, and it's what ended up being the iMac G3, isn't it? You've got a screen, front-facing speakers, one cable for everything. Essentially, it's the same formula, it's just a little bit beige. So I'm beginning to like the 5200. It's not as bad as people say it is. We are going to reinstall the original operating system to see how bad that makes it. It may require some updates, but it's really nice that this nearly 30-year-old machine has got a working optical drive, a working floppy drive, a working screen. As I said, the battery hasn't exploded, so there's lots to like about this particular machine. We'll see you in the next one.